the roll call, please?
Lendl Story,
Here.
Steve Abel,
Here.
Ken Fuller, Ellen McKay,
Here.
Michael Krieger,
Here.
Anastasia Taylor, Jody Moses, Carol Stolpe,
Here.
Daniel Young.
Present.
We have a quorum, and the second order of business is approval of action summaries. We have action summaries for Monday, April the 5th, 2010, and Wednesday, April the 7th, 2010. May I have a positive motion, please? Positive motion by Mr. Krieger. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Young. Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, the motion is approved and the action summaries are approved. No minutes for approval under special order of business. Are there any disclosures? Mr. Young.
In the case of S10625-10 and S11496-4 Eagle River or Eagle Crossing, I've worked on these properties in the past on the stormwater, and I have ongoing financial relationships with the presenters, so I'm declaring a conflict of interest.
Could I have a motion on Mr. Young's participation, please? Mr. Krieger. Is there a second? Mr. Fuller seconds. Mr. Krieger, would you speak to your motion, please?
I don't know. I've forgotten whether I supported the motion in the first two times it came up, but I'd like to hear more about did you refuse it the last time? Okay. Well, then for the same reason that I refused it the last time, I support the motion.
Is there any other discussion? Since we have objection, we're going to need to vote. So a yes vote will direct him to participate, and a no vote will direct him not to participate.
I'm sorry, would you repeat that again? I'm having trouble
Yes.
with my computer.
A yes vote will direct him to participate, and a no vote would direct him not to participate. Okay, that motion fails, and Mr. Young, you will be excused for those first two cases, but hang just a moment. Any other disclosures? Mr. Krieger.
Yeah, a couple. In the first two cases, particularly this came up originally, I proposed the attorney client and portion property several years ago. I don't think that precludes me from participating in this matter, but I think it's closed and I don't know whether there's no ongoing attorney client.
Well, because we brought it up, is there, may I have a positive motion for Mr. Krieger's participation, please? Mr. Fuller. Would you turn your mic on, please?
I'd move that Mr. Krieger be required to participate.
Second, Mr. Young seconds. Mr. Fuller, would you speak to your motion, please?
I believe Mr. Krieger could be fair and impartial in rendering a decision on that matter.
Is there any other discussion? Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, Mr. Krieger, you're directed to participate in those cases. Okay. May I have a motion to direct Mr. Krieger to participate in case S11557-3, Turnigan View number 3? Mr. Young, is there a second? Mr. Abel. Mr. Young, would you speak to your motion?
Yes, I do not intend to support this because I believe the attorney-client relationship will create a conflict.
Okay, since there is objection, we need to vote on the matter. A yes vote will direct Mr. Krieger to participate, and a no vote would direct him not to participate. That motion fails, and Mr. Krieger, you will be excused from case S11557-3. Are there any other disclosures? Okay, seeing none, we're done with that part of the agenda, special order of business. Nothing on the consent agenda, nothing on old business, which brings us to new business. And Mr. Young, you are excused. The first case under new business is case S10625-10, Eagle Crossing subdivision. And the second case under new business, case S11496-4, is also Eagle Crossing subdivision, and the two cases are closely related, and we're going to take them as one, although there will be two motions. So that being the case, could we have the staff's presentation, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I begin, there are a number of people who are present who are available to respond to questions from the board regarding these two cases. Starting at my right is Captain Green. He is chief of the Eagle River Fire Station. Deputy Fire Marshal Martin Schwann. And to my left is Bob Kniefel. He's with the Municipal Traffic Department. He's the traffic engineer. Jerry Weaver, who is the Planning Department Director. And Mr. John Kiefer, he is with Project Management and Engineering, Private Development, who works with subdivision agreements. Thank you. Basically, the issue before the board regarding these two cases, they both deal with Eagle Crossing development. And the main issue is the construction of Eagle River Lane to interim emergency access standards. As last approved for both the subdivision agreements that are associated with these two cases, as well as the preliminary plat approvals, the interim emergency access improvements were to take place in 2009. For various reasons, that did not occur. Notably, the economy has experienced quite a bit of volatility, so to speak. The request now before the board for both of these is to amend a condition of approval for each case, as well as to amend the existing subdivision agreements to allow construction of Eagle River Lane to interim emergency access standards by July of this year. Mr. Kiefer is available to respond to questions about the subdivision agreement and the status of the plans. I do understand that the plans have been approved, that the financing is in place, and that the improvement to those standards is shortly to begin. And the petitioner, of course, can correct any time frames that errors that I may have made in that statement. But basically, the improvement is to allow for a second access. There have been comments returned from fire plan review and comments from regarding the response time that the fire department has actually experienced in responding to emergency calls. And Captain Green is here to respond to any questions about response times that the board members may have had. Fire plan review has consistently urged that this connection needs to be made. The traffic department has consistently said there is need for a second access. It ultimately will have to be built to full standards, but as of right now, the interim emergency access standards will do for the coming year. And there has been agreement with the comments that have been received from the reviewing agencies that this is something that needs to take place as soon as possible. With that in mind, the planning department, taking into account all of the comments, both verbal and written, from the reviewing agencies and from residents of the Eagle Crossing development, as well as comments from surrounding neighbors, taken all on balance, the department does recommend approval in the case of 10625-10, does recommend approval of an amendment to Condition 1B of the May 6, 2009 summary of action for that case, as well as the subdivision agreement 2006-23 that requires by July 10, 2010 to construct a segment of Eagle River Lane to interim emergency access standards, entering into a subdivision agreement that includes cost estimates and a performance guarantee that may have been addressed already with the subdivision agreement and the financing. And also, because there have been, because of the market, there have been delays or a slowing down of construction that, although the board has previously approved extensions for development of the subdivision agreement, the phase plan has not yet come before the board to match those amendments to the phasing of the development. And so Condition 3 addresses submitting an amended phase plan for approval by for action by the Platting Board as a non-public hearing item. It is a non-public hearing item because basically the amended phase plan will reflect what the board has previously done in prior actions regarding this particular case. And again, the petitioner may want to address condition number 4, but Watershed Management has requested that the need to revegetate be accomplished this year as well. And basically, the conditions are almost the same for S11496. The issue is the same as just presented to you. Other than that, to state the department does fully recommend approval of an amendment to Condition 2A of a May 6, 2009 summary of action for that case, and amendment of a subdivision agreement 2006-021, and basically the conditions read the same. The department does fully support the immediate construction of Eagle River Lane to interim emergency access standards as proposed by the applicant, and does have the authority to enter into and require a subdivision agreement for the full build-out of Eagle River Lane. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there any questions of staff, of any of the parts of staff? Can I have the screen? Well, all of us don't have the screen. Did
I have some questions.
Okay. We okay?
If you'll hit the button at the bottom of your screen that says on the floor, you should be back to where you need to be on your screen. Is everybody there?
Okay. Ms. Stolpe?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. O'Brien, We've all gone through this now 4 times. I know we're all anxious to get it resolved. And I'm mostly anxious to get it resolved for the benefit of the neighborhood because I have grave concern about their safety because of the limited access they have. As I was going through the packet once again today, I began thinking about the fact that it's been almost 10 years since this development was started. I understand that there's a different owner now than there was when the development started. But there are complex issues here that I don't have a grasp of the answers to. And it has to do with how it came to be. I didn't go back and look at the numbers, but my recollection is there's 800 or so homes in that development with one road in and out, which is in violation of the code. And 10 years is a long time for that kind of thing to exist. And the staff and the Platting Board have been working on this. I've been here 4 years, almost 4 years, 3.5. So I wonder if you folks could help us understand, help the Platting Board understand how we got to this point, because there are so many issues incorporated into this decision-making that we have to make tonight. One of them, for example, is the developer is in default if we don't approve it. Well, what does that mean exactly? So if you could just give us an overview of how we got to this point, what is, I understand what default is, but I don't understand is what I guess you would say, the code requirements or the legal requirements of the municipality of Anchorage regarding those issues.
Madam Chairman, Ms. Stolpe, basically, this developer before you this evening had nothing to do with those previous subdivision agreements and subdivision approvals. This is a developer that has come in after the fact. To answer your question bluntly, the municipality failed in processing the subdivision agreements and maintaining the adequate guarantees for improvements over that period of time. So we all recognize that there were errors and issues associated in the past. This developer stepped forward to rectify the situation almost immediately. This summer, it'll be improved, and move towards fulfilling the requirements of a subdivision agreement with an appropriate financial guarantee to make sure that the improvements are installed within the time frame that the Platting Board determines. We are, just as hopefully for a comfort level, that we're moving to make sure that these kinds of things don't happen in the future.
And if I may, the second part of the second question I had, and that was, what if we don't approve this? As I understand it from the packet information, the developer is then in default. What exactly does that mean?
Madam Chairman, Ms. Stolpe, there would be no reason for the board not to approve it. We have a staff that has fully supported the construction of the improvements. The developer is willing to construct the improvements. But should the board not approve the construction of that road, then the developer has no obligation to construct the road. It would be not in the municipality's best interest for the board not to approve this request.
I'm not exactly sure that answers my question. In general, when a developer defaults on a requirement such as this, what steps are then taken? I mean, obviously the road has to be built, and it has been the developer's responsibility to build it, and that has not happened.
Madam Chair, basically, we probably should do this in a work session with the board to talk to the board about how subdivision agreements are executed, the kinds of things that go in the subdivision agreements, the type of performance warranties that go along with that to ensure their completion. Code has been changed a little bit over the past few years. We're in the process of revamping the department to provide consistency with these processes to make sure that we have adequate financial guarantees when we record a subdivision plat. Because when you record a subdivision plat and the improvements, the public infrastructure improvements are not constructed at that time, the subdivision agreement, the contract with the developer, and the performance warranties are all that we have. And in essence, when they go in default, the municipality needs to step forward and enforce the agreement either by taking the performance warranty that went along with that or go into litigation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are there any other questions of staff?
I have one question. What is the magic number where you need that second exit? Is it number of houses or bodies or?
I'm sure Mr. Fuller, the number has been a changing number over the years, but today the present fire code talks about 30 units. So what is the magical number? We've far exceeded that number, and it's time basically to make that connection.
Right. That's 30 housing units, or could that be commercial as well, or?
Martin can speak to the fire code, but I believe it's 30 units.
It depends on through the chair, it depends on the type of development. In 1- and 2-family developments, once they exceed 30 dwellings, they're required to have a secondary fire apparatus access road. In multifamily dwellings, then it's at 100 dwellings where they would be required to have a second fire apparatus access road.
Mr. Krieger.
Thank you. I was going to reserve some questions until we heard from the petitioner and the public, but a couple things came up, Ms. O'Brien and Mr. Weaver, that I wanted to ask a couple questions or follow up on. You indicated that there was no performance bond for the construction of this road. Is there no bond that the municipality can fall back on to have the road constructed to interim emergency standards?
Madam Chair, Mr. Krieger, well, I'll let Don Kiefer speak to that because he's intimately familiar with the agreements and the performance warranties.
Well, let me tee it up better then to Mr. Kiefer. When the board in 2009, I believe, acted on this, for some reason there was a part of the board's action was to eliminate the requirement for a performance bond. I'm looking at page 48 of our packets. And the item number 2 there says approval of the elimination that required, among other things, an estimate and a performance guarantee. So I take two, and this will end up in a question to you, but I take 2 points from that. First is there was at one time a performance guarantee that apparently would have come into play in some way to perhaps address the situation that we're now in. And the second question is, does anybody remember why the board in a year ago or whenever eliminated that performance guarantee? And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Kiefer. Thank you.
Through the board, Mr. Krieger, there was at one time a performance guarantee for this section of roadway. However, a representative from the petitioner would probably back what I'm about to say. If, like Margaret was saying, if it's different from what I'm going to say, they can correct me. But because of the economic climate we're in right now, we're having a very, very difficult time having financial institutions reinstate guarantees that are about to expire. And a lot of guarantees, because of financial rules, do have expiration dates. So as those dates approach, we will contact the developers and say, we need these guarantees renewed. And in some instances, the financial institutions are flat saying no. So we do not hold a performance guarantee at the moment for this section of roadway.
Follow-up question through the chair. Thank you, Mr. Kiefer. Is it typical that we would have a performance guarantee for that part of a development at this point in the project?
Yes, it would be typical for the municipality to hold a guarantee. And in fact, that's why we had one at one point.
Yeah. And then one more question, and then I'll sit and listen. I think it was Mr. Weaver or Ms. O'Brien. I believe the current owner of the property, or the current developer, was in ownership in 2009 when we extracted this commitment to have the road built to emergency standards by last year. I think it was the fall of last year.
Right.
So to the extent that it was suggested that this petitioner came onto the scene late and wasn't responsible for the non-performance to date, wouldn't that be incorrect? I mean, wasn't there supposed to be something done to get that road built last fall?
There were some commitments made by this board and the developer to have certain improvements installed by this date, yes. So we have actually set hard dates for the interim improvements and the final improvements. But again, because of the economy, because of the value of real estate and whatnot, I would ask the petitioner at this point to expand on that.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions of staff? Ms. Stolpe?
I'll ask this question now, and then the petitioner or the petitioner's representative perhaps wants to address it. But I was reading through the packet today and was interested in a couple of aspects that were addressed by a couple of aspects of this interim road, emergency access road, brought up by, excuse me, by the neighbors regarding use of this road in ways that they find difficult. Excuse me. But then also the dust and the dirt being kicked up, and I'd like to know how you see this working out through the summer and the fall, and then next spring when there's no snow or ice around.
Did you say when there is or isn't snow and ice?
Is not.
Okay. First off, we have approved the interim roadway design for this project, and it will be very heavily signed for emergency and utility vehicles only. We included utilities because there is a water line down through this entire passage where this roadway goes that has to have maintenance to include a pressure station. But the roadway is also going to be topped with a recycled asphalt material to where it is a dust control methodology for a paved or for a travel surface. There will be some drainage that's accommodating any snow melt or ice melt in the spring. And if there's any other details I can offer.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions of staff?
I'm sorry, I said I wouldn't, but I have one more question through the chair, if I may, to Ms. O'Brien. And in our packet, there's information suggesting that right-of-way objects to this time extension, and that the Eagle River Street Maintenance object to the time extension. Can you address their objections? I'm looking at page 2 of the original February 3rd packet.
Madam Chair, Mr. Krager, my reading of this is that they weren't objecting to the second connection. what they're looking for is for a full build-out. And so they were commenting on that they felt that the interim emergency access standards wouldn't satisfy their long-term needs for an eventual permanent and long-term connection. I believe that is what I understood their comments to say, that they really want the full build-out at this time. And at this time, what is being worked on is the interim emergency access standards as being the most critical for the safety of the occupants in terms of fire response of the Eagle Crossing development.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, I have a question. I would like to address my question to Captain Green. If you could talk about the response time issue.
Several of our, through the chair, several of our captains, I believe all of us have driven the area and compared the two response times. They vary somewhat, but roughly the time savings is between 3 and 5 minutes if we were able to access off of Eagle River Road, Eagle River Lane, versus off of the loop road through Driftwood Bay at roughly 3 to 5 minutes.
And is that a critical time?
You tack that on top of our normal response time, and it certainly can be. At someone who's not breathing, your house is burning, another 3 to 5 minutes is possibly a lifetime.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Krieger?
Through the chair to Captain Green and perhaps to Deputy Chief Schwanke? Schwam, I'm sorry, thank you. A lot of the public comments have been that they're okay with building the road to interim standards. They want gates at either end. They don't want traffic going through there on a normal basis, despite the profound and emphatic signage that might be placed with these new plans. And I don't know whether you folks will have, you gentlemen will have a chance to address that concern, but it's certainly one that's got my interest, which is, is there, how do you evaluate the net gain to public safety by opening the road, opening this road, this interim emergency road, to reduce reaction time by 3 to 5 minutes over the concerns that have been raised by the public with respect to kids accessing the school there on that road? Could you address those issues if you've thought about them? Either of you, either one.
Through the chair, there was a lot of questions in there.
Does it make sense, I'll try to boil it down, does it make sense to put in this interim emergency road without gates on either end, given that there may be a lot more traffic than fire trucks going up this emergency road at times that may interfere with the pedestrian traffic?
We're not insensitive to the residents' needs to keep that a low traffic road, certainly, but a gated road, especially one gated at both ends, is time consuming for us to drive up to it, open the gate, drive through it, go to the next gate, open it. It really reduces the advantage to having a second road there by constricting the time. And of course, most of our responses are time sensitive. So in that respect, we would like to see the road open and cleared year-round so that we could use it at any time. Gating it really limits its value from our standpoint.
Thank you, Mr.
Any other questions of staff? Seeing none, we'll open the public hearing, and during the public hearing, we'll follow the procedure on the front of the agenda. Persons who wish to testify, the petitioner will go first and have 10 minutes. If they wish to reserve rebuttal time, that needs to be a part of that 10 minutes. Representative of groups, community councils, PTAs, and such have 5 minutes, and individuals have 3 minutes. We keep time by this little timer up at the front. It's green when you're speaking. When you have 1 minute left, it turns yellow, and at the end of your time, it turns red, and there's a little beep, and you should, if you haven't already, sum up at that point. So when your testimony is complete, don't leave the stand, because you may be asked questions by the board, and any member may only testify once. Any individual may have appeal rights relating to an action that we take, and that procedure is also outlined on the front of the agenda. With that, may we hear from the petitioner's representative, please? Is your mic on? Is the mic on? Is the little green light there at the bottom?
There. All right. Madam Chairman, members of the board, my name is David Grenier with Triad Engineering, and I'm representing the petitioner tonight. And also with us is Connie Yoshimura, the managing member of Driftwood Bay LLC, and Rick Davidge, also with Driftwood Bay LLC. First off, I'd like to thank the board for their patience on the several postponements that we had on this case. We feel that the time that we've had has been spent well. And we'd also like to thank staff and all the effort that's been put together on these conditions and working through this complex situation. We're pleased to report tonight that we have approval for the interim emergency access road. This we feel has been a significant process to this date. The plans have been completed, they've been reviewed, they've been stamped approved. We've actually bid the project, and the contract has been awarded. And we're at this point we're ready to have the pre-construction meeting with PM&E and then issue the contractor the notice to proceed. So we're within, in our estimation, within a week to 10 days of starting those improvements once the road restrictions are lifted. As far as issues that are unresolved, we're still looking at the right-of-way issue that is adjacent to Mr. Hansen's property. There's still an issue as whether the right-of-way exists. There's been new information that has just surfaced with the municipality, and so we're working through those issues. As far as the full build-out of Eagle River Lane, we feel that tying it to phasing rather than 2 years, that was the previous approval, really is the more fair and reasonable approach, especially in these economic times. And we feel that this really would be this provided a successful tract on getting to that goal. As to Mr. Krieger's question on why it was eliminated, the financial guarantee, why the financial guarantee was eliminated. This happened in May of last year. It was before I came onto the development team. But my understanding was that because the emergency access improvements were to be put in place, and they would have a performance guarantee tied to those improvements, when the full improvements were ready to be
constructed, there would be a financial guarantee tied to those. So it's essentially breaking it into two separate guarantees. So looking back at the record, I feel that was an appropriate and reasonable process to go forward. As far as the default issue on the subdivision agreement, basically this emergency access road improvements were to be built last fall because of several reasons. One of them working with staff to get the plans approved. We didn't make that date. However, we are on date now to make the July completion date, and we feel we've made good progress there. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I'd like to reserve any time for rebuttal.
You have 6 3/4 minutes for rebuttal.
Thank you.
Any questions of Mr. Grenier? Mr. Krieger.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Grenier. A couple questions for you. On this elimination of the guarantee, you indicated it happened when it wasn't on your watch, but I'm confused because I thought you suggested you thought it was reasonable because now there were 2 guarantees. But there isn't a guarantee for the interim road. Otherwise, other action might have been taken to get it built, correct?
Through the chair, Mr. Krieger, there is a performance guarantee that has the municipality's name on it that was tied to the actual bid documents, and that guarantee will be presented to PMU when we have our pre-construction meeting. So there is a guarantee that has that will be presented.
It hasn't been delivered to the municipality yet. So if the municipality said, we want to draw down, so to speak, on that guarantee or enforce the guarantee, there isn't anything that the municipality has that they could enforce, correct?
Through the chair, Mr. Krieger, the process how those guarantees work is if two things happen. One, if this construction does not occur at all. In other words, the developer basically says, no, I'm not going to build it, or it gets down to a point where there's punch list items that after the project has been constructed, those items, for some reason, are not completed. Then the municipality can go in and draw against that guarantee. So it's really after the fact. It's not as far as the municipality using those funds. And it's more of a rare situation, and maybe Mr. Kiefer can talk to how many times it's actually used, but it's more in the event if the improvements do not get built.
May I follow up? In this case, the petitioner had an obligation to finish that road last year. Isn't there a guarantee that can be drawn? Is there a guarantee that can be drawn on now to reimburse the municipality were it to go out and do it itself, based on a financial guarantee that's been made by the petitioner or the developer?
No, there is not.
That's what my question.
Right. The process is more that there wasn't enough time, several things, wasn't enough time to get the plans approved, to work through the different departments of the municipality, to get to that point to present the financial guarantee. So actually the default is not the construction outline, it's the default that we didn't have enough time to get the improvements to get to the point to actually start construction.
Is there a contract completion date in the current contract that what is the current contract completion date for your road building contractor?
Through the chair, Mr. Krieger, it's July 1st of this year. Are there
related damages clauses in the contract if he doesn't finish by July 1st?
No. Within the mass spec, there is clauses that allow that. This actual construction contract is a completion date of July 1.
But isn't this the contract between your company and the contractor?
It's between the developer and the general contractor, correct?
Why does it matter what the mass says or doesn't say about liquidated damages?
The construction plans are based on those specifications, and the project is tied to municipal standards. We did not call out in this specific contract any liquidated damages.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have for now.
Mr. Story?
Yes, Mr. Grenier, through the chair. You had mentioned that there's right-of-way issues, and I'm assuming that with those right-of-way issues, you don't have rights to construct through private property. So if that's the case, how can you meet the date not knowing if you are able to construct through the private property?
Through the chair, Mr. Story, the issue is more for the full improvements to the road, not the emergency access improvements.
So you're saying that you do have rights to construct the emergency access?
There's adequate right-of-way for this 26-foot top width versus the wider width and the sidewalks involved with the full build-out. Correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Grenier? Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak in either case S10625-10 or case S11496-4? Anyone at all? Please step forward and state your name for the record and spell it if it's difficult.
My name is Fred Ripp, R-I-P-P. I'm a resident adjacent to Ptarmigan Lane, or to Eagle River Lane. And, I guess I know the fire access is necessary. One small point, I guess, stating that there's only one access to that lower area. The Millbury Road is a secondary access, so that makes two access points down to the lower area. To say that that's not an access, I guess you could argue that the whole of Eagle River Valley has no access beyond the greenhouse. There's only one road in and one road out of that valley, and that thing's a chimney. So, to say that there's only one way in, I don't really agree with that. But I do realize that they want to get down that road, and it makes sense. They need to get in there. I guess what I'd really like to argue, what Mr. Krieger was saying, are we trading one problem for another? Opening that road up without gates is going to invite vandalism. People that go down there to party, they do build fires. That's a safety problem. I don't think the people leaving the garbage and the condoms and the syringes are going to obey any kind of signage. They haven't before. We've had no trespassing signs down there. Nobody seems to pay any attention to that. And we get a pretty good head of steam just on that short, blocked-off, dead-end road right now going out across the school crossing. We get in there and they spin it out, and they're hitting 25 miles an hour before they hit the school crossing. And if this thing's opened up, they're going to be flying through there. And it's, I hate to say kids, but it's young people generally, people that are not obeying the rules. And with all due respect, Chief, I know you need the quick access, but everything's a compromise. The school is gated and locked in the evening, and there's the emergency people would have to stop and open gates there. Different hydrants downtown on large buildings, those things are locked and gated. So I don't think it's a new procedure that they would have to stop and open up a gate and take the time to do that. So that, I guess that's my argument for gating the access down there. The requirement to put wrap on it, recycled asphalt product, that stuff has already shown that it doesn't hold up under wear and tear. A couple of trucks spinning out, that stuff will be worn through, and the dust problem will be back. And And lastly, as far as the developer is concerned, I do believe they inherit the liability that comes with a project they buy, and they do need to build out the road or not build out the road. I'm sorry. They do need to do what's required to make it safe. They need to, if gates are required, put those in. They can pay for the gates. In their defense, they've been given a problem that's pretty hard to solve. There's so many different design criteria they can't meet. There's right-of-way problems, and if the road has to go from here to here, there's going to be a grade, and it's way out of limits already, and I don't know how they're going to meet that. And I don't know what body approved that plan in the first place, but some consideration should be given to that.
Are there any questions of Mr. Ripp? Ms. Dolphy?
I don't have a question, but just to address one point that you made. I didn't go back and read the specifics on it, but there is a code in a municipal code that there is a municipal code that requires ingress and egress to be separated by certain distance. I don't remember what that distance is, and so I think it's Mills Bay, and I can't remember the other one. Yeah, and they're not separated far enough to meet municipal code. So just to give you a heads up, I didn't know that until I read this packet a while back.
So, I mean, it kind of begs the question how the whole of Eagle River Valley could be developed beyond the 3-mile point. There's one way in there and one way out.
Any other questions of Mr. Ripp? Did you have a question, Mr. Krieger?
Yes, I did. Thank you. Through the chair. Thank you, Mr. Ripp. So, as I understand it, you see a problem with the construction of this interim road. Do you have any suggested solutions?
My suggestion is give them the access, but put the gates on. There's been interim solutions here for 12 years or since 1998. And, who's to say there won't be more delays? I mean, we can require the builder or the developer to do all these things, but, I mean, a lot of the developers are insolvent these days. And again, if they can't build it to meet requirements that were impossible to meet in the first place, there's going to be delays, and there probably should be until they figure out the right way to do it. I just want the gate, basically, to make it short and sweet.
May I ask a follow-up question?
Certainly.
Eventually, however, even if there's a gate for this interim road, there is a plan that there's going to be, although you suggested there might be a huge grade there is a plan that there's going to be if not a collector road, at least a road that meets code, that's not an interim emergency road. At that point, the gates won't be there, correct?
That's correct, yes. I understand that's the long-term plan.
So how is the neighborhood, or how are the public's concerns there benefited by, in the short term, putting gates on either side, as opposed to the fire department folks that are saying it's going to slow down their access?
Well, the gain is, first of all, the dust reduction, and the main thing is that school crossing. It's a very busy school crossing up just above our house. My children walk along this route, and I've heard numbers between 30 and 100 kids crossing going to the elementary school there. And the gate's just going to stop the through traffic, and that's my main concern. And again, I'm very skeptical about it being a interim solution. I think it could take years.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Mr. Ripp? Thank you. Anyone else wishing to testify in cases S10625-10 and S11496-4?
Good evening. My name is Mary Sant. I'm Fred Ripp's neighbor. I live on Eagle River Lane south of Ptarmigan. I'm going to have to intersect with this road. my letter is in the packet if you read it. I'm the one that's talking about maintenance. Fred and I have been keeping that snow clear all winter. Now, the muni won't touch it because it wasn't a dedicated road. When it becomes an emergency access, will it be a dedicated road? Will the muni plow it? We're not going to plow it for the use of everyone else. Who plows it? And it's going to have to be done well. I don't want to be stuck down there at the bottom of the hill and get up to the top of the hill and it's not plowed. So can anyone give me an answer? Who's going to plow it? The muni? The developer? Not me. Talked about the dust. The snow wasn't mentioned.
Yeah. Well,
does anybody know?
I'm sure that the staff knows, but
the staff does.
Right.
The staff?
Right. But
does anybody know?
Do you have an opinion? This is not the time to ask questions, for you to ask questions of staff. It's for you to testify on the case and then us to ask you questions.
What kind of an opinion do you want? I don't want to get stuck in there in the snow. I want to know who's going to plow it.
Okay. Then you should contact the traffic department at the municipality.
It's in the packet. My letter is in the packet. I explained that.
Okay.
I'm 75. I need an ambulance myself, and I want that road kept well open the way we're doing it. We keep up with every snowfall.
Okay.
Okay? So I need to get in touch with them.
Correct.
Not you.
Correct.
Okay.
We don't
I will.
That information. Anyone else wishing to testify?
I'm Robert C. Johnson. I'm a land surveyor. I'm representing Mr. Cousineau, who lives in the first house going down Eagle River Lane. I just came into this late yesterday afternoon. I have a question for Jerry Weaver as to what, if there are plans, how wide will this total be coming up to Eagle River Road?
Here again, this is not the time for the people who are testifying to ask questions of staff. It's the time for you to testify in...
I'm concerned whether it's all going to be in the existing right-of-way. One other concern, I walked this road up 4 or 5 years ago. It would have to be emergency use because it certainly doesn't meet the standards for grade, the lower part down there. It has to be, it's much steeper. But if it's all going to be in the existing right-of-way, I don't see any real problem. But if they're going to take some land from some of these people that have to live along it, along Eagle River Lane, why, then that's something else. I see no reason for an emergency road to be, it's 80, 50 and 33. It's 83 feet wide of right-of-way there now. And that should be adequate for anything that happens on an emergency road coming out.
It's our understanding that the emergency road can be built within the existing right-of-way.
That's all I have to say on it.
Are there any questions for Mr. Johnson? Thank you. Anyone else wishing to testify?
Good evening, sir. My name is Nathan Cosimo, and I live on Parkview Terrace Loop, which is in the older existing portion of the Eagle Crossing subdivision as it is now. I grew up on Eagle River Lane, and I as well have my own concerns about the development of Eagle River Lane. Basically, the existing portion of Eagle River Lane as it sits now goes down a hill that I understand is a grade of 8% for about a city block's distance, and then it goes to a 90-degree turn to the east
which is where they want to start the new development of Eagle River Lane down into Eagle Crossing subdivision. What many people are referring to as far as this pedestrian crossing with the school children is quite a serious concern. Many kids are crossing and they're following along Ptarmigan to the east over to Ravenwood School. And with the development of Eagle River Lane down into the subdivision as a full blown-out road, basically you're going to have a lot of people slipping and sliding down this 8% grade road. And especially now, we've already seen a lot of speeders coming through there that we haven't seen before with the new development down there. And every year there's quite a few people in the ditch down at the bottom. If we open this up to through traffic down into Eagle Crossing subdivision, I'm very concerned about the children there. Another concern of mine is basically the fact that, at least in Eagle River at the council meetings, much of the public has not really been informed to the scope of this project. From what I understand, Eagle River Lane, as it sits now, the existing portion of it is a collector road. We understand what the specs are for a collector road. However, every time we ask anybody, either from the road board or from the Eagle River Community Council, we get answers that it's going to be a collector road, which is 80 feet wide. Some people say it's a 60-foot wide road. Nobody really has any answers. Regarding other issues with the road, nobody seems to have answers as well. We've talked at the meetings about this being an emergency access road, and although I missed the last couple meetings, which I understand Eagle River Lane was mentioned, Bill Starr came and sat before the board and told everyone at the meeting that the road was too steep for the fire trucks to go through, that the police department to go through, school buses can't go through there. So, regardless if that's true or not, it's kind of misleading the public, and I'm kind of disappointed in the fact that our city officials aren't giving us the proper responses to the public to even make an informed decision on the matter one way or the other. I am, regardless of the issues, I'm really not for a through road on Eagle River Lane down into Eagle Crossing subdivision. Most of my information on it was from the package that the Muni put out back in 1998, because no numbers have been given since. And those numbers say that that's a 10% road down there in the Eagle Crossing subdivision, that it's crossing wetlands, and that their position was that greenhouse would have been the best way to go, only there was a parcel of land in the way that was too expensive to acquire. I believe since then things have changed, and that is no longer an issue. And from what I understand, that is something that's in the works for a large road into the subdivision in the near future. And I think that some of these options should be looked at before doing things like crossing easements, if that's the case right now, and figuring out right-of-ways and pedestrian issues and safety and grades and driveway problems and everything else before we kind of sit back and look at the long-term schedule of this project.
Are there any questions of Mr. Fresno? Mr. Fuller.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Fuller.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, where do the children from Eagle Crossing go to school now?
Currently, the Alpendale Elementary School was an elementary school that was built within the subdivision. There's no bus access allowed into the subdivision, and I've seen public notices regarding some of the residents of Eagle Crossing subdivision complaining about speeders and people parked on the road, and that is one of the issues, is that they currently have no bus access, so people have to drive their children to school there. From what I understand now, Alpendale Elementary School is pretty much full, and so now they are trucking many of the kids to Ravenwood Elementary School, which is supposed to accommodate all the residents within the entire Eagle River Valley.
So the kids from the subdivision go to that school, right?
That's correct. I believe that was changed last year. Last year, I believe, was the first year they opened up Ravenwood School to children from Eagle Crossing. Eaglewood subdivision is right to the west of Eagle River Lane, and that's where the majority of the children crossing Eagle River Lane is coming from.
Thank you.
Ms. Stolpe?
Thank you. Going back in the earlier part of your testimony, you talked about the children crossing, and I've read that repeatedly. Many neighbors wrote in with that concern, and I I don't know where where do the children cross? Is there one particular place where they're crossing?
Maybe he could refer, maybe he could refer to something in the packet so we can sort of follow along.
The existing portion of Eagle River Lane that has been there for however 30 years or whatever it may be is only about maybe a 3-block city distance in length. It terminates down at Ptarmigan for the most part, except for the gravel road that is in question right now, which extends beyond that portion. When Eagle River Lane terminates, it basically terminates at the bottom of an 8% graded road, and at which point it turns at a 90-degree angle to the east, which then becomes Ptarmigan. Now, at the bottom of Eagle River Lane, there, at the bottom of that hill, there's a bike trail that comes down and it ties into Eagle Crossing subdivision. And children are on that bike trail and they're crossing Eagle River Lane at the bottom of the hill.
Right, where there's that 90-degree turn you were talking about?
Yes. And what my point was regarding if we were to put a through road in to Eagle Crossing subdivision is that you're going to have many people coming down this steep hill trying to continue going straight. And as it sits now, there's several cars, especially in the wintertime, that lose control as it is, which creates quite a safety impact for the children. And according to the 98 packet, they're estimating 2,000 to 8,000 ADT coming through there with a blowout road. And right now there's only 5 houses that use that street, so the impact is going to increase significantly for the safety of the children crossing there.
If I may continue, Madam Chair, just one other thing. There's been some discussion tonight and previously about these gates that would have the obvious effect of not allowing through traffic until that road's built out to full standards, as I understand it. Where are those gates relative to where the children cross? Where do you think they would be? I guess I could ask the fire department too, but
I was actually in question of why they would be gated on both ends myself. As it sits now, the cars that are coming through right now and are ending up in the ditch down there at the bottom are cars that come through and drop their children off already. There's no gates at that portion of the road, and I was in question on where exactly the 2 gates would be myself as opposed to 1 gate down there as well. I was to the understanding that a gate would be feasible or would be necessary on the Eagle Crossing side, because otherwise if you put it at the top where the 90-degree turn is, there's 3 houses there that would not be able to access that unless they also had access to the gate. So regardless one way or the other, there is some liability as far as the children go, but if you are adding 2,000 to 8,000 cars driving down that road every day, that is going to increase significantly. Did that answer the question?
It does.
Okay.
Mr. Crick.
Do you have a copy of the packet there?
Yes, I do, if you'd like to see it.
Could you go to page 46?
Okay, sure. Do you mind if I grab it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
While you're grabbing it, I mean, you could be talking a foreign language because, I mean, I'm not oriented on your map here, so, you know, up and down and right turns and all that. So on 46, there's an Eagle River Lane on the upper left-hand side. You see that?
Yes.
And then there's this kind of block checkered line, and then there's an Eagle River Lane in the middle of the map. So help me out here. Where do you live, and where are these elementary schools, and where's this steep hill? And
if you're looking at the map and you're looking close to the top left portion of the map where Eagle River Road and Eagle River Lane come together,
I don't see an Eagle River Road on page 46 on my map. I see an Eagle River Lane. I see a Raven Drive where there's an intersection of Raven Drive and Eagle River Lane.
Yes, just oriented on this map. I want to make sure I'm on page 46. This was handed me today.
You need to be on
it was here.
So we won't be on the same page, so to speak.
I'm looking at, currently I'm on page 11, which shows a good map of it. And my 46, are you referring to the packet?
Yeah, you can use 11. I've got
Okay, thank you.
I can use 11 or 46. Either
Thank you. Okay, yes, sorry, I was in the wrong packet there. Yeah, I'm 46 of the S10625 here.
Yeah.
Eagle River Road is not shown. However, it's basically one street north of Raven Drive.
Okay.
So the Raven Drive intersects Eagle River Lane, and you're heading towards Ptarmigan. That's a very steep hill. And where Eagle River Lane intersects Ptarmigan, that's a 90-degree turn. And at that point, where Eagle River Lane extends south past Ptarmigan is where basically the road in question is today. And where Eagle River Lane intersects Ptarmigan is where the pedestrian crossing is for the children coming out of Eagle Crossing subdivision, which is that large subdivision just to the west of Eagle River Lane there. That's where most of the children are coming from that cross over that road.
Where's the school?
The school is at the intersection of Run Lane and Ptarmigan. It's just in that PLI, I guess that northeast corner of the PLI there.
Thank you. That helps me understand your testimony better. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Any other questions for Mr. Cousino? Thank you. Anyone else wishing to testify? Anyone else wishing to testify in these cases? In case S10625-10 or S11496-4, Eagle Crossing. Seeing none, Mr. Grenier, would you like to use your rebuttal time?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a few clarifications. Eagle River Lane is classified as a local street, and it's designed to local street standards, which is a 10% maximum grade. What this section of road that we're looking at is at about 9.2%. As far as the gates go, we've worked with staff on that. Our original application did show gates based on meeting with the community council. This was their request, but after listening to staff and especially the fire, we felt it was prudent to put up the unauthorized, no access, unauthorized vehicles prohibited signs. We felt that that was a prudent move. As far as snow plowing, it's our understanding that the municipality or SBURSA in this area would be responsible for that, and I'd like staff after this to confirm that. That's my understanding from our meetings. And the design of the full improvements at Ptarmigan and Eagle River Lane is a challenge as far as the school crossing. I'm understanding that there is a grant, or at least one in the works, as far as upgrading the section of Eagle River Lane from Ptarmigan up to Eagle River Road. And that is, our plans for this full improvements would need to be coordinated with that effort and to make sure there's a safe crossing at that location. Also keep in mind that the residents of Eagle Crossing, when one of the future phases is built, there will be a walkway that will access the southern side of the Ravenwood School, so that gives a second, if you will, a second access, pedestrian access to the site. The last point is just to expand some on the construction process of the emergency access road. We're using GMC Contracting. They were the winning contractor. They've built a number of the improvements in this area. They're one of the better ones that we've worked with. They have a very good reputation. not only with the development community, but also with the municipalities. So as far as meeting their time commitments, we feel comfortable that that will occur. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of Mr. Grenier? Mr. Krieger.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Grenier, for addressing those comments. Just a couple of follow-ups. One of the speakers wondered whether or not there would need to be some kind of a taking of land in order to construct the roads that you plan on building later on in this development to whatever standards are applicable. Could you address that, if you know?
Yes, through the chair, Mr. Krieger, the emergency access roads, as spoken about earlier, will fit within the right-of-way. The full improvements in the vicinity of Mr. Henson's property needs to be resolved. There's only half right-of-way, half of the right-of-way is in dispute at this point. And so we need to work through that before we can proceed with that section of the design.
Okay, I probably wasn't very clear. May I follow up?
Mr. Hanaway.
Hanaway.
Okay.
Now, Mr. Johnson there, who spoke, I didn't understand him to be representing Mr. Hanaway. I understood him to be representing a different landowner.
And he was raising the landowner is on the west side. Is that correct? Do you live on the west side of Eagle River?
East side of. I'm on your side, but I'm up across the second one.
He's got to speak into the mic so we can hear.
He is up by Raven Drive, which is the section that the municipality is talking about. It's not the section we're working on at this time.
All right, thank you. One more question. What do the petitioner's current plans show with respect to how long this interim road would be in and when the full standard, either local standards or collector street? You're nodding your head as though you understand my question, so thank you. If you understand, go ahead and answer it. I didn't ask a very careful question.
If I can have Connie Yoshimura answer that.
Okay.
Once the right-of-way issues are worked out and once the market conditions improve and we are able to develop additional phases as identified in your memorandum, then we will complete the road to full build-out standards. I believe that issue is addressed in your memorandum.
Okay. Can I ask a follow-up question to that? Will the performance guarantee that you're going to give in connection with this interim emergency road, will that guarantee the construction of the road to full standards?
No, it will not.
So several comments have said, who knows how long that interim road will be there? And I gather from the variables that you indicated that there are a bunch of variables that could prevent that road from being constructed in the near future.
That is correct. One is the resolution of the right-of-way. The second one would be market conditions, and that would be tied to our ability to secure adequate financing. We do have financing available to build the road to interim construction standards. And it will have a guarantee and a warranty attached with it through GMC, and that warranty will be for a minimum of a 2-year period of time. And if everything went well in the marketplace, and we do think we are in recovery to a minor extent, we would hope to be able to build the road to full build-out standards at about the same time the interim guarantee expires. But again, we would ask the board to make that conditioned to the phases based upon the memorandum that staff has recommended to you, because we are still uncertain about not only market conditions but the ability to finance. It is impossible for a private developer at this in this financial environment on a national basis to go out and secure their own warranties and bonds for the construction. That really has to come only at the time that we're under construction, and then we pay the general contractor to provide that bond, which secures the guarantees and warranties.
Mr. Krieger?
Well, yeah, a couple questions then. The department recommendation in our memorandum packet just says entering into a subdivision agreement that includes the cost estimate and the performance guarantee. And it says the subdivision agreement, which my question, I guess, is when is that subdivision agreement going to be entered into? The recommendation at this point is the subdivision agreement shall be executed prior to the development of phases J, P, Q, and R.
Mm-hmm.
Could you explain what J, P, Q, and R are?
Yes. J is an area that's located off Eagle River Lane, and there will be no development of Phase J until the full build-out. P, Q, and R are to the east of the current subdivision.
So there will be no development agreement until the economic conditions favor the construction of phases J, P, Q, and R.
That's correct.
So throughout that time, there'll just be this temporary emergency road with or without gates connecting some properties, right?
Yes, sir.
Any other questions of Mr. Grenier or Ms. Yoshimura? Thank you. With that, we'll close the public hearing, and the matter rests with the board. Are there any questions of staff? Got a lot of staff here.
Madam Chair. Well, I appreciate the efforts of the members of the public that have come tonight to educate us. I guess the first place to start is on this gate issue. I mean, the whole safety issue is becoming a bigger and bigger balloon. And I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, but the fellow that talked about the grade and the turn and made some pretty interesting points about that road. But the specific question that I have would be for Captain Green, and it's relative to this gate, the gates, plural, I guess, situation. I am no technology whiz. I can just barely deal with it. But I did note in the paper a while back that there were some issues about the fire department being able to change the lights from red to green when they're on the move to help the citizens. And it occurred to me, as this gentleman was making his points, that if there's technology available to make those lights turn from red to green in order to accommodate the fire apparatus, why wouldn't there be technology available to put in the gates and have some kind of technology available so that you can activate the movement of those gates out of the way as you're approaching, as opposing to have to stop and get out and open them up and get back in?
Through the chair, I believe it does exist. we don't currently have any access gates that Anchorage Fire Department activates in town now that, like you described, but they do have them on access to like Coulis, to the airport, and they're activated by usually someone in a guard shack. But the light changing mechanism is called an opticom, and yes, I would assume that someone much smarter than me could hook those two up. But it's a good idea.
So if this board in its wisdom decided to require that interim access road to be gated for the safety, in innumerable ways, the safety of the children crossing the road, the safety of the neighbors who have people using that road in ways that makes it not safe for them and their children, that would be something that could be accomplished.
Through the chair, I would say yes, that would certainly work for us. I am concerned as to whether or not the road would be able to be maintained clear throughout.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your word. That what would?
That the road would remain snow-free. It would have to be plowed throughout the winter as well. Otherwise, it's blocked for half of the year and makes it half as useful. The gate idea certainly is a good one, and I think there's probably somebody out there that uses it now. From our perspective, once we're through that gate, if it's not plowed, it might as well not be there.
If I may, Madam Chair, Ms. Sant asked the question about who was going to maintain the road, and I guess I was operating under the assumption that road would be maintained by the community, because if it's an access road for fire apparatus and police and, emergency responders, then it would be kept open. Now, it's always a bad idea to assume anything, so I guess I'd better ask the direct question. Is that road going to be maintained so that at any time emergency responders need to access that road through the gates, that the road will be clear?
Madam Chairman, Ms. Stolpe, my name is Bob Kniefel. I'm the municipal traffic engineer, and we've been living with this issue for, it seems like centuries now. Maybe just to make sure you understand what's going on here. Number one, the Subursa will be maintaining the roadway once it's built to the temporary standard. And then, of course, as it goes to the final standard, they would also maintain it at that point. So that's one piece that's out of the way. Number two, concerning the gates, the issue with the gates is one gate causes a real problem, only because if you're at the top of the hill and the gate's at the bottom of the hill, you can drive all the way down, and then how do you turn around and get back up the hill again when there's only one gate at the bottom? So if you really think it's necessary to have gates, you should have a gate at the top and the bottom, just for the driving public awareness in that. We as traffic would recommend against that entirely in that, because I think it defeats the purpose of what we're trying to do, knowing that this is a temporary situation. This is not the long-term solution. When the subdivision was first approved back in the late 90s, there was always going to be a second access point. There was some discussion, is it going to happen at Eagle River Lane? Is it going to happen at the greenhouse access point? There was even an engineering study done that looked at the various access points, and just from our review of that information, the greenhouse access is even steeper than this one, so that's not to us a viable option, and this is where the access needs to be, is at this particular location. As to putting in the gates and using the Opticom type system in that, that's always a possibility. It's just money, because again, there's no power out at the locations where the gates are going to be. We have to run power to those gates to operate them in that. You're probably talking a $20,000 to $30,000 installation cost for each one of those gates, and then whatever it takes to get the power to those same locations. So that's it gets to be a pretty big bill once you start talking about a temporary situation in that. As to the school crossing, I think it was always our intent that once the road is built to the final urban standard, it's opened up for through traffic, we have design guidelines for school crossings. And this one, as a collector street, would meet those guidelines. We would be installing, with the final project, flashing lights, the typical 20-mile-an-hour speed limit signs with the flashing lights on them at the crossing from the Eagle Wood, I always get the names wrong, but the subdivision to the west, I think, is Eaglewood. There is a trail crossing there that comes right out at the Ptarmigan access point. So we would be installing our typical 20-mile-an-hour flashing speed limit signs at those locations for the school crossing. So, we're going to address that issue, but again, on the temporary roadway, we're not going to do it there, but we will do it with the final design as that does come through the process in that. So I hope that answers your questions.
Well, it does, but then it raises more. I'm sorry. The developer has just advised us that all things going quite well, that this final permanent road would be built in 2011. But then she also listed, I think, 3 conditions that could interfere with that. So I'm sure you'll appreciate, given my remarks at the beginning, that if this was the plan back in the late 90s, and it's now 2010, and we still don't even have an emergency access road, how much confidence do you suppose I'm feeling about when the permit road's going to be in? And in the meantime, we've got what really is boiling down to a more and more significant safety issue in any number of ways. So I guess that's not a question, but just sort of a comment. I don't know if you don't need to respond if you don't care to.
No, Madam Chairman, it's a reasonable question. What assurances do we have for those 3 additional phases that the developer alluded to, that we will not be allowing the development or recording of plats for those 3 subsequent phases until we have an agreement and a guarantee?
Madam Chair, may I ask a...
Mr. Krieger.
Through the Chair, Mr. Weaver, thank you. I guess it's a follow-up question. I'm sympathetic with Ms. Stolpe's view that we don't have a lot of assurances that in the next 2 or 3 years, 4 years, whatever, that we're going to be asked to prepare, review a subdivision agreement for these later phases, because economic conditions may not favor it. So 2 things. In that case, we'll still have an interim road, and Mr. Kniefel's concern, and we won't have the flashing lights at the intersection there. So I'm just wondering whether it makes sense to go forward with this project in this little bit at a time when there's no apparent guarantee that we'll get to where the road's ever going to have to be built out to full standards and these other things start to happen. Can you address that?
Madam Chair, Mr. Krieger, possibly a little bit, but as I indicated earlier in the discussion, we believe it's in the municipality's best interest to allow the construction of this temporary road into the development. It serves as emergency access for police, fire, EMT people to go in both directions, that we have a developer willing to build that, albeit there are issues with respect to traffic next to the school. That is a collector street north of Ptarmigan, back up to Eagle River Road, that the community has been looking at for funding to make improvements of the rest of that street, the collector street. There will be additional traffic on the road, and it may impact those pedestrians that are using the road and the children going from Eaglewood subdivision to the elementary school, and that we may need to do something in addition to what we're proposing here this evening, but I'm not quite sure what that is. But we have the best of the situation that we can get. It would serve no public benefit not to grant the request.
May I have a follow-up question? Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Just a follow-up question. Has there been discussion between PM&E and your group and the fire and safety folks about the merits or demerits of putting those two gates in? And, you know, we're sort of at this point, I mean, I shouldn't speak for the board, but there's been some significant discussion about whether or not it makes sense to have those two gates, and I wonder whether that issue has been thoroughly analyzed by your folks in connection with, in dialogue with the fire safety folks.
Madam Chair, Mr. Krieger, it certainly that's a good question. It certainly has. All of our departments have looked at this, and we believe that this is the best solution to the existing situation.
And that would be not to require gates?
Not to require gates, because we do not support the gating of these connections when you have the necessity for emergency access in and out of the area. You have one mitigating issue here, and that has to do with the pad use in the interim until the full improvements are made, but not, you know, it is an area of concern for us that we'll need to look at further, but the connection, it really is necessary. We have fully vetted it, but fire and traffic can speak to it additionally, but the O&M, Isabursa, PM&E, we've all looked at it in depth.
Well, I understand you looked at it in depth in terms of, does it make sense to go ahead and put the road in? But I don't know whether, I guess I'm just, assure me, if you will, that it's been looked at in depth in terms of putting it in with those gates, and with the assumption that there may not, in the next 5 years, be a full build-out of that road, just because the developer may go away, or the economy may not favor it. Thank you.
Bob may want to speak to it, but we have looked at the construction drawings for the interim road, and it will function adequately to the mass specs. It will meet the grades for the temporary road, and we believe that we are pretty close to resolving the issue with respect to the missing link for the additional section line area, and that road, it again will meet our specs for grade and for PED connection, but the issue further north of the children crossing from Eaglewood to the elementary school really is outside the parameters of what we're talking about here, but there will be additional traffic there, and the community has looked at that and made that a concern, so that's a known concern that we need to address.
Madam Chair?
Ms. O'Brien?
I believe that there's Fire Marshal Schwan can respond to that in terms of what the actual International Fire Code states regarding gates.
Madam Chair, board members, I'd like to point out that the Fire Code designates the Fire Marshal as the Fire Code official, and the Fire Code official is the only one that can actually authorize gates across fire apparatus access roads. It is my recommendation that we do not authorize, that I do not authorize the gates across the fire apparatus access roads. And I base that upon my analysis of the Eagle River Crossing subdivision, the fact that we have Mills Bay, Driftwood Bay so close together, the fact that we had a fire in the woods adjacent to the subdivision to the south along the river in 2008, and that the index currently is very high for the potential for another fire in that area. When we weigh access for fire department personnel, we have to weigh the responders getting in and the public getting out. This road could serve both purposes. The expectation is that Mills Bay could not be used. It's a right turn, right out only. Driftwood Bay would take us through a residential area where we're going to have a number of people trying to get out, and that this alternative would be viable and allow us access into that subdivision. Now, when we talk about access, we also have to talk about responding. We respond like 87% of our calls are EMS calls. So perhaps you can argue that the potential for a fire is not as great, but the potential for an EMS call is significant. And when we're responding to EMS calls, every minute is vital. If you have a heart attack patient and they're waiting for that first responder to get there, the difference between 30 seconds and a minute is significant. Even on fire. Fires double every 30 to 60 seconds. So if we're now increasing our response time by 3 minutes to 5 minutes, that fire is going to be significantly greater. The purpose of the gates, there is a purpose for gates. I have allowed gates in other areas where it did not impact the response time. So my first obligation has to be, will this gate impact response time? Now, I know someone talked about a gate up at the school, and it is true, there is a gate, and a lot of schools are gated. But we're not talking about, they're open during the day, and at nighttime, we don't have a large population living inside that building. So I ask you to really consider the fact that I'm the only one that can authorize this gate. And right now, my recommendation is not to authorize that gate.
Thank you. Any other questions, staff? Then I would entertain a positive motion in the...
Do you have one on?
Is your mic on?
I do have another issue that I wanted to bring up and ask some questions to staff, and then I'm hoping that the board will consider. And that is, in one of these two, A or B, it talks about an amendment, no, a variance to allow a sidewalk on one side of the street and a trail on the other.
That's not a part of this case at this point.
We're not talking about both. I thought you said we're talking about both cases.
We are talking about both cases, but we're talking about the emergency access road, not the full build-out.
Okay, so we'll deal with that later. That's fine.
Do we have a positive motion in the first case, case S10625, Eagle Crossing subdivision? Somebody. Mr. Fuller. You need to turn your mic on, please.
Madam Chair, I would move to accept the recommendations of staff and move this to a positive vote. Thank you.
The motion has been made, and is there a second? Emma. Mr. Story seconds. The motion is for approval of an amendment to Condition 1B of the 5609 Summary of Action for Case S1625-9 and the Subdivision Agreement 2006-023, and then as stated on page AAA and BBB of the packet. Would you speak to your motion, Mr. Fuller?
Thank you. Yes, I think it's been well-studied and well-designed and planned, and the timing is appropriate. My only recommendation would be a local traffic instead of restricted traffic, because when people know that road's there, they're going to start trafficking it, especially if I was in Eagle Crossing. I would rather go that way than out the other way for Eagle River Road, personally. But the future is unknowable, so this accomplishes what is necessary now for public safety and for access, and I believe it's been well studied by staff. Thanks.
I'm unclear as to whether you're making the local traffic option a part of your motion.
If that was possible, I would like to see that as posted as local traffic versus restricted traffic. So yes, I would move that language to be included instead of the restricted traffic.
No, it's changing his motion. Mr. Story, is that, are you still willing to second that motion?
Yes.
Discussion. Mr. Krieger.
I'm not sure I understand Mr. Fuller's distinction between local traffic and restricted traffic. And I'm not sure that once I understand the distinction, I'd be interested in the staff's perspective on the significance of that and whether or not I'm not sure I understand what the difference is, I guess. Thank you.
Well, when you have restricted traffic, now all of a sudden anybody trafficking there that's unauthorized is in some kind of violation. So you're going to have the local people in that area trafficking it. There's no way around it. So you're just making criminals out of a bunch of citizens, near as I can see. That would be my concern.
So, may I follow up? Yeah, now, is the current plan to have some kind of signage that says restricted traffic, locals and non-locals alike shouldn't use this road, and therefore you locals are criminals if you use this road?
Through the chair, Mr. Krieger, the signage that we have proposed in the adopted plan set, I believe, reads emergency vehicle and utility vehicles only.
So, how do you feel about an amendment to the department's recommendation that would change that?
Through the chair, Mr. Krieger, I would be against it, I guess. The signage we have now will allow the police to enforce keeping the local traffic off of there, and that's the goal, what we're trying to achieve here. Whereas if you're going to put up a local traffic sign, then everybody's going to drive on it, and there's no really need for the sign. So if the goal is to have only emergency traffic and utility truck traffic on there, then we need to have a sign that says that, and I don't think the local traffic sign accomplishes that.
Thank you. Well, I still have the floor. I guess I would vote against the motion as it's currently phrased based on staff's position that it doesn't make sense to put a sign there that says local traffic or restricted traffic only. So,
Mr. Fuller, do you want to amend your motion to drop that option or continue with it?
Well, if the children of the people in Eagle Crossing are attending that school, I just don't see the mother going all the way out to whatever that main road is, come all the way up around to Eagle River Road, down Eagle River Lane to get their children when they know there's a road right there. So, but yeah, I'll defer to staff. Thank you.
Okay, so Mr. Fuller has agreed to drop the local option. Mr. Story, are you okay?
I did have a comment on Mr. Fuller's first amendment, and that is, I do understand the restriction to the road, but I also, from the comments that I heard tonight and that I read in our packet, that there was a big concern for people driving the road, and it just seems to me that there would be an awful lot of, I don't see that the police would be patrolling that area, and it would be a hamper to the police to have to patrol the area with the restricted signs. I would think that the neighborhood would be calling the police quite often to keep people off the road, and it seems like a burden on our police department to continually have to police that section of the road just to keep people off because of signs. So having it open to local traffic seems to be a better option to me.
So do you not concur in dropping the local option?
I would defer to the staff's recommendations to keep the signs the way that they're designed, and I concur with the amendment.
Okay. Any other discussion? Mr. Krieger.
I'm not sure I know what we're voting on, because I thought Ms. Stolpe wanted to raise this issue about traffic or pedestrian trails and urban standards and sidewalks and stuff, and it looks like we are acting on that issue if we approve the department's recommendation on this case, because the second paragraph of the department recommendation addresses this pedestrian trail, and so I'm not sure, because isn't that up for discussion now and under this motion, or has it come up later?
We're going to let Ms. O'Brien answer that question.
All right.
Ms. O'Brien.
Madam Chair, Mr. Kroger, those standards have already been approved. All I was doing is reiterating what the standards for improvement were that the board approved in previous actions. I was specifying the approved improvement standards.
But not for the emergency access. It's for full build-out.
Those were the full build-out standards, and so when
we're acting on emergency access.
But one of the conditions on this on this amendment is subsequently to enter into a subdivision agreement for the full build-out. So because we are amending condition 1, which was entering into a subdivision agreement. So I'm reiterating that, and I'm restating the standards that the board has already required.
Okay, now I'm confused.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
There's two sections to this approval. One is to amend an original condition of approval, and that is to amend it just in terms of the timing from 2009 to 2010. Also, there is the actual subdivision agreement that needs to be amended that stated standards and a time. So what the conditions do is they address and amend the time to allow the construction of the interim emergency access by July 10th, 2010, but still continues to entering into the subdivision agreement for the full build-out. The board has already approved the requirement for the full build-out, and this is just restating the standards that the board previously approved in the May 6, 2009 action that was taken last year. Because I had to amend both. I had to amend the summary of action, had to amend the subdivision agreement, which lays out the standards of construction.
It was my understanding that we're amending the condition to not call for full build-out at this time, but to
And we're not, Madam Chair, because we're amending the timing of the full build-out, that it must be executed with phases rather than a drop-dead date, as we were doing in the past.
Ms. Stolpe? Okay. Mr. Krieger?
Thank you. I intend to support the motion. I think the way it's teed up for me, at least, is that the fire marshal is not going to approve gates, and that leaves us with the option of not approving this extension, which sort of puts us in whatever limbo we currently are. So it's not exactly the most desirable situation, but I think that failing to approve the motion probably won't advance the public interest and may work against it.
Mr. Story?
I also intend to support the motion. I feel that there's multiple unresolved issues and variables before us. I also believe that we are, trading one problem for another problem, but I also believe that the interim access is needed, and it's one step closer to the full build-out. I'll be supporting this motion because I do trust that the staff recommendations are in the best interest of the community.
Thank you. Ms. Stolpe?
Well, excuse me, I listened carefully, and I do appreciate the efforts of the staff and all of the additional people that have come tonight to testify. I can't support the motion. And the reason I can't support it, but the reason I can't support it, this has been an issue from the late 90s. And it seems in Mr. Weaver's comments that there have been errors made and situations exist. There's the grade of the road, there's the 90-degree turn, there's the issue with Mr. Hanaway's property. There's the repeated pushing back of timelines. There's a changing of issues. I mean, I really thought that we were going to be able to talk tonight about the two sidewalks. I did some research on the pedestrian plan for the municipality, and it clearly states that it is a requirement that there be sidewalks on both sides of the sidewalk, both sides of the road, not just on one side, given the degree of development here. And so we're in violation of that municipal code by approving this. And the issues just go on and on and on. And it doesn't seem to me a very good idea. It doesn't seem to me to be a good idea to continue to compound the problems instead of saying, okay, let's stop where we are, take a fresh look at this whole issue, and find ways to make it whole for the developer, for the municipality, and especially for the people who live there. I mean, there's 800 homes. What did don't I remember? I didn't go back and look at that number, but there's about 800 homes in there. So there's maybe 2,500 to 3,000 people in and out of one road with no help when it comes to developing this situation to be a more safe environment for them and their children. I mean, I don't need to make a long speech. You certainly have heard my issues over the this evening and in previous comments, and then last May when we went through this. So I think in the long, for the best possible solution in a long-term situation, I think it would be best to vote against it, and so that will be my vote. Thank you.
Any other comments? Mr. Abel.
I, too, don't think I support this motion. A couple of weeks ago, I drove up to Eagle River Lane just to take a look and see what we were doing there. And I don't know where all the access to the subdivision behind Ptarmigan is, if you go down Eagle River Lane. I don't know where that is, but I do know that if I lived there and wanted an alternate access, I don't know what the traffic's like during rush hour, but I would definitely use that, whether it said emergency vehicles only or not. At the beginning of our meeting here, there was mention of if we do not go along with this, there will be a default action. And I think that would kill the road. We heard from the fire marshal, and he will not grant a gate there. I think there should be some wiggle room. I think, like I said, right now there's a bunch of boulders that obstruct traffic. That seems to do pretty good because I couldn't get down there to see where the road ended, and I think there should be some wiggle room. I think we should be looking out for the residents of the area, and I think if you do put that in without a gate, I think it'll be abused. So I'm not going to support this motion.
Mr. Weaver?
Madam Chairman, before you get to your vote, I just want to bring up a couple of things. This does not violate any municipal code, Ms. Stolpe. The Platting Board has the authority for access roads. This is an access road into the development and certainly meets our standard specifications, and the board has the authority to grant this type of road improvement. And Mr. Abel, I'm not sure exactly what your uncomfortableness is with this and talking about wiggle room. I'm just not following that conversation, but it's been a demonstrated. We've given you the municipal perspective here that this is a public safety issue to make this road connection and to make it now. And it's the Platting Board's obligation to take that advice. If you don't make that road connection now, you leave those 600 to 800 homes in the development at peril, and we do not recommend that you take the action as you're directing.
Mr. Abel, you may.
The wiggle room I was referring to was, we went by Ravenwood School. They have a gate, and even though, that to me is wiggle room, there is peril. There could be a fire at the school. There could be somebody in danger. As far as I understand, there's only one road in and one road out. A gate was granted there. I don't see how, placing a gate on the road would delay emergency response. I just don't see it.
Well, if I can say something, Mr. Abel, the fact of the matter is it's not our call for the gate. It's the fire marshal's call. And so if the fire marshal said that there'll be no gate, then by code he has the right to do that, and we don't.
Madam Chair, I just have one very brief comment. I'm reading from the Anchorage pedestrian plan that was approved in October of 2007, and it says, when streets exceed a threshold of 1,000 average daily trips, typically that would be a street serving about 120 homes, are developers required to construct sidewalks on both sides of the street? That's my only comment.
Okay.
Madam Chair, if I could maybe address that with Ms. Stolpe. I think if you look at the department recommendation under item number 2, what has been previously approved was we'd have a sidewalk on one side and a pedestrian trail on the other side. So we are accommodating, actually doing more than what the code requires by having both a sidewalk and a trail. And that's what's shown in item number 2 on the department recommendation.
Any other comments?
Yes.
Mr. Krieger.
Thank you. I didn't think I would find myself in the position of advocating in favor of this motion, but I want to address Mr. Abel's concerns. I mean, I guess I see that we're definitely between a rock and a hard place on this, and if we reject the motion, then it appears as though that emergency road isn't going to be built. And the non-building of that emergency road seems to me to be worse than building it but not having a gate on it. So I guess in simplest terms, that's how I have come out on it, is that the people that we're supposed to rely on for expertise are telling us there's a serious safety issue in the current condition and that we should act to remedy that. And the public is saying they have some concerns about one of the effects of that, which will be there may be more traffic on the road. The fire department is saying, all things considered, they're not going to put gates on it. So while I might be sympathetic that there's going to be a lot more traffic on the road, it sounds like the considered judgment is that the safety concerns of not having an access road in there outweigh the other safety concerns. So I thought I'd be the last one to come around, but I see the advantages and the need to allow the development to proceed, although it's been a haphazard process. So I would urge a yes vote on the motion. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak? I, too, agree with Mr. Krieger and would urge a yes vote on this issue. There have been things that happened that are beyond the control of the powers that be, and that's the market conditions. And right now, funding is a key issue. I personally just secured a building loan, and it was a horrible, difficult process. And I only asked for $5,000. I mean, it's ridiculous. It took 2 months. And so I'm sympathetic to the fact that the funding is not available for these types of projects. So if we do have an avenue for funding and are able to construct a road, even though it's not what we would like in a perfect world, that's our obligation. And with that, would you please vote? And that motion fails. Moving on to the next case S11496-4. Mr. Fuller, will you make that motion, please? Could you turn your mic on, please?
Sorry. Yes, I move we accept the staff's proposal and vote to construct this road and time extension as proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Story seconds. Is there any discussion? Or are we going to go with our comments?
Madam Chair, I thought we were finished. I thought we had, so.
We have two different motions. We have two cases. We need two motions.
And I'm sorry, then may I ask for the repeat of the motion?
It's basically what's on the front of case S11496-4, approval of an amendment to condition 2A of the 5609 action summary for case S11496-3 and the subdivision agreement 2006-021.
And how is that different than what we just voted on?
It's a different subdivision agreement and a different condition that we're amending. The result is the same. So, okay. Mr. Krieger.
I guess I'm going to support the motion. I don't see any significant difference between the issues for the one subdivision and the other. So I still favor the motion, and I guess the only reason I might be opposed to this is so that I could be in the opposition and reconsider the next time. But I'm not that sophisticated, and so I'm going to support the motion.
Mr. Fuller?
I just want to reiterate that the road's going to be where the eventual road is going to be. So this is a process. I mean, you put in, there's a dirt trail there now. Obviously, people transfer on it, right? Except for the rocks. So now you got a bunch of motorcycles and bicycles and hikers or whatever. So this being accessed already, and all you're doing is improving it to a more usable level at this point in time, with looking to the future to have a fully supported and sidewalk street. That to not do it would be a dereliction and would be a tragedy for the people there if something did happen. And I think, what's option two? I mean, if you don't pass this now you go back to the drawing board, and what do you kill the subdivision? Do you have years of non-development? It makes no sense. It doesn't accomplish anything for anybody to reject it. Thanks.
Anyone else? Mr. Abel?
I think there's one thing that I failed to mention when I was speaking before, but when we go up and look at the subdivision, I guess to the east of Eagle River Lane at about Ptarmigan, there was a lot of testimony that there's a lot of school children that walk that path. And right now, as far as I know, and this is just from my own observation, Eagle River Lane there's not that much traffic on it. There might be on a school day, but when I was up there wasn't. And I think if we open that up, that there's always a possibility. There's no plans for any kind of school crossing or any kind of lights or anything like that, and there's all kinds of concerns that I have that I just can't agree with the motion.
Anyone else? Okay, since there's disagreement, we need to vote. The motion required 5 positive votes, so it does not pass. Okay. What are the wishes for the board on the break?
My preference would be to punch through, but...
Okay. Moving on to case S11806-1, road subdivision. You ready?
Madam Chair, this is a subdivision of 3 lots into 1 lot. There's a variance request seeking relief from dedicating right-of-way for West 32nd Avenue. Property is zoned B3. The lots are vacant, and the property is served by all public utilities. Currently, the dedicated right-of-way is 30 feet. It was provided in 1947 with a recording of Plat P63. That plat created 41 lots within Irie subdivision. The current standard for right-of-way width is 60 feet. This would typically would have been a reversion to acreage subdivision. It comes before the board because of the request for the variance not to dedicate 15 feet of additional right-of-way for the north half of West 32nd Avenue. In reviewing the variance request, it does not appear that the standards are met for the variance. The 30-foot wide right-of-way really is not sufficient to support services such as snow storage, drainage improvements, pedestrian facilities, and landscaping. These items have become a part of the ongoing development within the municipality. A 30-foot wide right-of-way may have been sufficient in 1947 to support the amount of traffic and the services and just the traffic levels that would have existed back then. But right-of-way is acquired when property comes forward to be subdivided, and that's in accordance with Title 21 requirements. The other thing that is of concern is that the petition site is located in the West Anchorage planning area. It's in close proximity to a major employment center, and it is identified for redevelopment and mixed use. On the land use policy map, the variance really does not conform to the comprehensive plan, which identifies this area of Anchorage, the northwest area, states that it is the oldest settled part of Anchorage, and that this area has the greatest potential for renewal and redevelopment. And the plan does note, Anchorage 2020, that local residential development has been ongoing for many years. As the lots are vacant, requiring the right-of-way dedication will not result in any building encroaching into a required yard setback. The southern property boundary is subject to numbers of easements, T&E and water and aerial easements. These easements then would become, if the right-of-way is required to be provided, these easements would simply become part of the right-of-way. So based on that, the department, based on opposition from the Municipal Traffic Department, Right-of-Way Division, and Project Management and Engineering, opposing the variance request, the department cannot support the request for the variance and recommends denial of the variances from 218010, dedication for streets, and AMC 2185, which establishes the minimum 60-foot wide right-of-way. The department does recommend approval of the preliminary plat subject to resolving utility easements, resolving the need to disconnect any unnecessary or redundant service connects, requiring the dedication of 15 feet for the north half of West 32nd Avenue right-of-way, and placing notes on the plat that are outlined on page 6 and 7, and making drafting corrections itemized in condition number 5. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Bryan. Are there any questions of staff? Mr. Fuller?
Currently, all the other lots are just have the 30-foot right-of-way, correct?
Madam Chair, Mr. Fuller, that is correct. But as the properties do come in for subdivision in the future, we will attempt to obtain the right-of-way, but they have the 30-foot wide dedication.
Do you anticipate that 32nd Avenue will become a higher traffic road than it currently is?
Madam Chair, Mr. Fuller, Based on that there has been ongoing redevelopment in the greater area, the statements of the comprehensive plan identifying this as a redevelopment area, and the fact that West 32nd Avenue on the east side of Spenard Road is a neighborhood collector. This is on the west side of Spenard Road, and it functions as a local road. It has not been so designated as a neighborhood collector. There are indications that in future, with redevelopment, there would be a need for right-of-way to provide pedestrian amenities, provide for snow storage rather than having it on private property for any kind of drainage improvements. That seems to be the development that has been taking place within the municipality in the ensuing 50 years since this was dedicated.
Thank you.
Any other questions of staff? Seeing none, would the petitioner or the petitioner's representative come forward, please? No, I guess we're opening the public hearing. I will do that. Okay, we're opening the public hearing.
Madam Chair, members of the board, my name is Craig Shavlik. I'm a professional engineer and land surveyor with F. Robert Bell & Associates for the surveying and engineering firm representing Anchorage Printing, who is the owners of the property. I'd like to mention that the owner of Anchorage Printing is also on hand tonight, Greg Rhodes. As a representative, the reason for applying for this variance was it will greatly reduce the amount of developable area by 10% because these are fairly small lots, they're only 150 feet deep. An additional 15 feet, 10% of it. With the proposed variance, that will limit the amount of the development that can take place on those properties. In addition, we don't foresee a complete 60-foot right-of-way being feasible down this street. This section of 32nd Avenue is 1,000 feet that's between Minnesota and Spenard. It's not a continuous right-of-way from the west side of Minnesota to the east side of Spenard. It's actually offset to the south by about a half of a block. So that's not a continuous portion of 32nd Avenue from western part on the west side of Minnesota to the east part of Spenard. It's actually one section that's only 1,000 feet long. Minnesota also, you can only go northbound because there's a median that's along Minnesota there, so it's only access the northbound lanes of Minnesota. In addition, there's approximately 20 other buildings that are along this 1,000-foot section, and with the expanding of the right-of-way would cause most of the parking for those buildings are along the street. With the expansion of the right-of-way, those on-site parking stalls would be removed. And staff's comment for making it for snow removal or snow storage and other things, that really would be a moot point because that's where all the parking stalls are currently. And if you put snow there, there's no place for them to park for their properties. I'm open for further questions, and I'd like to request the remaining time for rebuttal.
We have about 7 3/4 minutes for rebuttal.
Okay.
Are there any questions of Mr. Shavlik? Mr. Fuller.
How many houses or buildings are currently on either side of that 1,000 feet? Do you know?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
How many houses are on or buildings are on that street currently?
There's about 20 of them.
20.
And there's one or two, without having done a full-blown survey, there's actually probably a couple that will encroach within that right-of-way if it's expanded to a true 60-foot right-of-way. The rest of them will be also, there's probably going to be some non-conformance for building setbacks from the front line if a continuous right-of-way was put from Minnesota to Spenard.
Do you have any idea how many are actual current kind of buildings versus the 1950s version?
There are, I would say there's probably about 50% of them are, probably about 60% of them are residential houses that are older but in good shape. The remaining are actually commercial buildings that are pretty modern.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Shavlik? Mr. Young?
Thank you, through the chair. I've been down the street in the wintertime, and because the snow storage has to be on the road, there's no room for snow storage. The road is can narrow down to just one lane, which seems like a safety hazard by increasing commercial traffic, would increase the traffic, and yet without sidewalks for pedestrians. How would you suggest the pedestrian traffic be handled without expanding the right-of-way?
Through the chair, Mr. Young, because this is an older subdivision developed in 1947, those considerations weren't taken into account. There's infrastructure currently built with other buildings and other things that you're not, without tearing those buildings down, you're not going to be able to provide off-street parking, sidewalks, and other things that are currently required for design requirements. You won't be able to meet those without disturbing existing buildings or other infrastructure. In addition, there is overhead utilities that runs down the north side of the road that would be right in the middle of a sidewalk if you were going to put a sidewalk in there now anyways. On the south side, there's light poles that would be in the same location. So to put a sidewalk in there, currently you would have to relocate the utilities, you'd have to relocate the lights, as well as some of the buildings.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Shavlik? Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to testify in case S11806 Roads Subdivision? Anyone at all? Seeing none, Mr. Shavlik, would you care to use any of your rebuttal time?
Madam Chair, after speaking with my client, we're content with the statement so far.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll close the public hearing and the matter rests with the board. Can I have a positive motion, please? Ms. Stolpe.
Madam Chair, I move for the approval of case S-11806-1, Road Subdivision Lot 1, moving for the approval of the department recommendation denying the variances from AMC 21.80.010 dedication-streets and AMC 21-.85 Table A right-of-way width.
A point of order. We have to have it as a positive motion, not even a positive motion to deny. It has to be a motion to approve, and then we can talk against it. It's a matter of voting.
Okay. I move for approval.
Okay. Move for approval of variance from AMC 2180.101 dedication of streets and AMC 2185 Table A right-of-way width. Is there a second, Mr. Young? Seconds. Would you speak to your motion, Ms. Stolpe?
Well, then I guess that I would not be supporting the motion based on the department recommendations as stated in our packet.
Is there any other discussion? Mr. Fuller.
Yeah, I would support the motion because I think, and the variance specifically because I think this is where we as representatives of the citizenry, of the individual versus the municipality, this seems to be a adverse taking of his property when none of the other properties on the street are contributing, and it's in anticipation of a future development that may or may not ever happen, especially with the limited nature of the street. And it reduces his property significantly and his ability to develop. So, thank you.
Any other comments? Okay. Since there's opposition, we'll be voting. A positive vote would approve the variance. a negative vote, a no vote would deny the variances. That motion does not pass, and the variances are not granted. Moving on to the plat, Ms. Stolpe, would you mind? Okay. Turn on your mic.
In the case of S-11806-1 Road Subdivision Lot 1, I move for the approval of the plat for 18 months, subject to points 1 through 5.
Is there a second? Mr. Young, seconds. Okay. Now we're okay with the technology as well.
It isn't just me, it's the technology as well. It's stressed.
Is there any opposition to the motion? Oh, would you speak to your motion, Ms. Stolpe? Sorry.
I vote for approval. I support the motion.
Okay. Any other comments? Any opposition to the motion? Seeing none, the motion passes and the plat's approved for 18 months, subject to the conditions. I see his ways. He wasn't ready for a break, but now he's going to.
Isn't he recused?
Yes, he.
Madam Chair?
I think we are going to take a break. I want a break. We're going to take a break for about 10 minutes. When we come back, we'll. We're at case S11557-3, Turnigan View Subdivision, addition number 3, for a second 18-month time extension. Could we have staff's presentation, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This time extension is basically in order to record the final plat. The final plat is fully signed. All the conditions are met, but it was clear that it was not going to be recorded prior to the expiration date. Therefore, the staff recommended to the petitioner's representative, please get in and request a time extension. As I say, this plat is ready to record within the next 3 days after I get an update on the cert to plat, and it'll be recorded. It's as simple as that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any questions of staff? Seeing none, we'll open the public hearing, and could we hear from the petitioner's representative, please?
Well, Ms. O'Brien had it right. It's ready to record.
You need to speak.
My name is Kenneth Lang. I'm here this evening on behalf of the petitioner. It's on page 3 of your plat. As you can see, it has all of the signatures on it. I submitted the final plat with the conditions of approval 4 weeks before the expiration date. And Ms. O'Brien worked to get it through the municipal hurdles, but there were 2 big ones. One is in the municipal surveyor's office. Larry Isom is getting ready to retire. He only works every other week. And but We still got it through there and got it signed by Tom Knox, the municipal surveyor, with 3 days to go. And then Margaret checked with the tax people who happened to be in the middle of their appeal process, and they were unable to, even though the taxes had been paid, they were unable to take the time to sign the plat. And it expired. Mr. Weaver admitted the problem and waived the reapplication fee, and that's where we stand this evening. The only real comment or question that I have, it has to do with NSTAR. And during as a condition of approval, it's always on your plats to get utility sign-offs. And we got approval from AWW, GCI, ATU, CEA, and NSTAR. And I think Ms. O'Brien should have that in her file that all five did sign off on it prior to our turning in the final plat. So I don't really believe it is necessary to go back to NSTAR. Tom Knox made one change to the plat, and well, if you look at page 3 or 4 of your packet, the NSTAR gas line runs through lot 24A, and it's about 5 feet from the dashed line, which represents the easement line for water drainage and gas. Mr. Knox was concerned that in the future, and these are his words, some tree hugger might decide that the dedicated trail, the 15-foot dedicated trail, is only for a walkway. So he added, with my concurrence, that it is also a water, gas, and drainage easement, and that more than encompasses the area where the NSTAR gas line is. So I would request that you please approve this extension and without the NSTAR requirement. And I reserve the balance of my time, if necessary, for rebuttal.
Mr. Lang, you have 6 minutes left.
Thank you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Lang? Okay, thank you. Ms. O'Brien, did you have something to say?
Madam Chair, in response to Mr. Lang's request, I did double-check, and those comments from NSTAR did come with this request for the time extension. So I went back and looked at NSTAR's sign-off. The sign-off just said walkway, and it didn't have any of the utilities, and I think that's what they're looking for. They never saw a final plat that indicated that there was gas, drainage, and water easement, and I think that's why they submitted those comments. So just to make sure that everything was acceptable in the final plat file, just one more sign-off from NSTAR would satisfy that, because I believe they never did see any final plat that had those notations on it. They were added by the surveyor afterwards on the Mylar.
Thank you. Anyone else in the public wishing to testify? In case S11557-3, Turning in View subdivision. Anyone at all? Seeing none. Mr. Lang? Okay. Mr. Lang, would you care? Mr. Lang indicates that he has nothing further to say. So we'll close the public hearing. Any questions for staff? Mr. Young.
Through the chair, Mr. O'Brien, how difficult would it be to get Instar concurrence with this plat?
Madam Chair, Mr. Young, the final plat as shown and the detail that's shown on page 4 satisfies the gas requirement. It's 15 feet wide and it protects their existing utility. I think all they want to do is see some proof that it's there, that protection is there. And from the municipal point of view, we would like to have an up-to-date sign-off from Instar. They're the only utility that submitted comments other than no objection to this time extension request.
Mr. Story.
Through the chair, Ms. O'Brien, isn't it as easy as walking the plat down to Instar and having them sign off on the final plat?
Madam Chair, Mr. Story, that's correct.
Any other comments? Seeing none, could I have a positive motion, please?
Madam Chairman, I'm in case number S-11557-3, Turnagain View Subdivision Addition Number 3, second 18-month time extension request. I move for the approval of the 18-month time extension to September 2011, subject to item number 1.
And Mr. Story seconds. Ms. Tope, would you speak to your motion, please?
I think that it's a logical thing to do to approve it.
Any other comments? Any objections to the motion? Seeing none, the motion passes and the plat is approved. We have Mr. Krieger back, and our last case S11804-1, Alaska Jewish Campus Subdivision, lots 1A and 1B. May we have the staff's presentation, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a subdivision of one lot to two lots for existing Lot 1, Block 5, Southridge subdivision. This was approved, the underlying subdivision was approved, and a plat was recorded in 2008. Therefore, another short plat could not be done within 5 years of the time of the underlying plat being recorded, and that is why it's before the board tonight. The property is located on the north side of East 35th Avenue, and it's on west of Latouche Street. The property is zoned RO, and it's developed with office and bank buildings. The petition site is served by all utilities, and it's in an urban area served by fire, building safety, and arts, the Anchorage Roads and Drainage Service area. The uses on the underlying plat, all three uses have shared parking. They also, the two lots that are existing do share an access to Latouche Street. That would be the existing Lot 1 and Lot 2. Lot 1 is being further subdivided into Lot 1A and Lot 1B. In order to maintain the shared parking as well as the access for these two new lots, the petitioner is required to enter into a parking and access agreement to update that. That will ensure that both proposed lots will have access to Latouche Street, which crosses over Southridge Subdivision Lot 2 in perpetuity, because Lot 2 is not part of this subdivision before you tonight. So they need to execute a parking and access agreement with land use review of the municipality, which will subsequently be recorded at the district recorder's office, either with or after a final plat is recorded. There are some plat notes that exist that were carried over from the underlying plat. Those plat notes, and they are plat notes, proposed plat notes 7 and 8. They do need to be amended to reflect this new subdivision, and the rewording is recommended, is addressed in conditions 4 and 5 of the preliminary plat recommendation, and additional plat notes are required to be placed on the plat. And the fire plan review wanted to see an as-built. They want to verify that the Uniform Building Code requirements are met with this new proposed subdivision. I imagine that has something to do with continued fire access, and that the new lot lines won't create any problems for fire access or buildings encroaching into required yard setbacks. Other than that, it's a very straightforward plat, and the department does recommend approval. That is shown on page 5 of the packet, subject to 7 conditions which extend to page 6 of the packet. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bryan. Are there any questions of staff? Seeing none, we'll open the public hearing and hear from the petitioner's representative.
Good evening. My name is Ken Ayers. I'm a Long Spring Associate Representative Petitioner. We have no objection to staff recommendations as submitted. Be happy to correct the 2 typos in Note 6A and ask for your approval. Thanks.
Why? 10 seconds.
I've done it faster.
Are there any questions for Mr. Ayers? Mr. Fuller.
Is there currently buildings already
Mr.
on
Fuller,
these
could you
lots?
turn on your mic, please?
Are there currently buildings already on these lots?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I can't hear you, Mr. Fuller.
I saw there currently buildings on these lots already?
I still couldn't hear you, Mr. Fuller.
Are there buildings on the lots?
There are buildings on there's 2 buildings on that one now. We're subdividing it to create a new lot around the 2 existing buildings that are there.
Any other question for Mr. Ayers?
Thank you.
Thank you. As there are no other members of the public, is there anything else you wish to say, Mr. Ayers, in your 9 minutes and 48 seconds?
I think we're good.
Okay. So we'll close the public hearing. And are there any questions of staff? Seeing none, could I have a positive motion in this case, please? Ms. Stolpe.
Madam Chair, in the case of S-11804-1, the Alaska Jewish Campus subdivision lots 1A and 1B, I move for the approval of the plat for 18 months, subject to conditions number 1 through 7.
Is there a second? Mr. Young seconds. Ms. Stolpe, would you speak to your motion, please?
That seems like a straightforward issue, and staff recommends it, and I support it.
Any other discussion? Is there any objection? Seeing none, the motion passes and the plat is approved. Appearance requests. Persons to be heard. No reports. Board member comments. I would entertain a motion for,
Could I get a comment in?
okay?
I would, Mr. Weaver offered earlier at the beginning of the meeting, of the hearing, to conduct a work session with the Platting Board to explain what they do and what we do and any other kinds of issues. I'd support that. I would try to carve time out of my day to attend a work session like that to further our orientation with the staff and the planning department. So I don't know if that's not a motion or anything. I just wanted to respond positively to his invitation.
And I second that idea. Good idea. So, Ms. O'Brien, if you could carry that forward. Thank you. Okay. Any other comments? Now I would entertain a motion to adjourn. We're adjourned.
Joined. Well, we've done these longer, but I don't remember one recently going quite as long. It's the time.